Finally, the useless old man is leaving.
The manager, Susan, chuckles as she says this. She's planning to use her position as the CEO's daughter to kick me out of the workplace. My former colleagues also gave in to her pressure and left before me. Unable to find the words to fight back, I just gave a glance and was about to leave when a certain person appeared, and upon seeing him, Susan and the other employees suddenly started to tremble. That person was? My name is Michael Reed, 48 years old. In St. Augustine, one of the historic resort areas in Florida, I manage a historic inn named Reed's Inn. Our inn has been in business for 80 years now, and thanks to our loyal customers over the years, we've continued as a historic hotel, cherished for its old world charm. Recently, due to the aging facilities, we decided to undergo a major renovation. The construction period is about 6 months. Honestly, for a small, family-run inn like Reed's Inn, closing for construction for half a year was far from feasible. However, this time, by joining under the umbrella of the Greater New York Hotel Group, a major player in the industry, we were able to get the entire construction cost funded. The Greater New York Hotel Group has been on a rapid growth trajectory over the past decade, achieving success by purchasing and renovating struggling traditional inns and hotels along with their staff before reopening them. Their mission is rooted in preserving the essence of classic American inns and hotels. It's quite an honor that our own Reed's Inn is considered worthy of such preservation. Though we weren't exactly struggling financially, I had been dragging my feet on undertaking major renovations, so the offer from the Greater New York Hotel Group was incredibly welcome. It looks like we'll be able to give our employees a bit of a pay bump and upgrade our systems and equipment, which should make their work a lot smoother. Above all, the transition to a new environment should also be seen as an opportunity for them to start fresh. Many of our regular customers are elderly, and they were delighted with the renovations that made our facilities more accessible. Then, 6 months later, Reed's Inn was reborn as Greater Ocean Resort, transforming into a new style of inn with amenities that were previously unavailable, such as a beauty treatment room and spa. With the expansion of the facilities, the number of staff more than doubled, and the employees who had worked at Reed's Inn learned a new manual from scratch and hustled to prepare for the reopening. Thanks to their efforts, the response was better than expected, receiving high praise from both regular and new customers. However, there were also colleagues who chose to leave. Officially, I'm the manager of Reed's Inn, a position held in name by the Reed's family. But in reality, I'm an employee under the Greater New York Hotel Group. There's a person dispatched from the headquarters with the title of operations manager, and I have to consult with her about everything I do. And this operations manager, Susan, is the 23-year-old daughter of the CEO of the Greater New York Hotel Group. She graduated from a famous university last year and, of course, has no experience in hotel management. But being a relative of the CEO, she's a particularly delicate person to deal with. We have to follow her direction and report everything that happens in the operation to her. If there's something she's not informed about, she immediately becomes moody and gathers the employees to scold them. Especially, she's harsh on the employees who have been with Reed's Inn since before the renovation. The first to clash with Susan was my mother, the landlady. The landlady tried to teach the new employees the ways of the hotel staff. But Susan started saying that the very existence of hotel staff was outdated.
Maid uniform is a just old-fashioned restraint. It takes up too much time and is hard to move in. From now on, everyone will wear these shirts and skirts I've chosen,"
she said, handing out new uniforms to all the hotel staff. This led to most of the hotel staff quitting, because the special allowance they received for wearing a maid uniform was gone. Moreover, wearing a maid uniform was a matter of pride for historical hotel staff, as important as a lawyer's badge. Yet, the landlady continued to wear her maid uniform daily until one day, she broke down and announced she was quitting. After all, nearing 80, she was feeling the limits of her physical strength. Since her husband passed away, her days of seclusion had increased. I couldn't stop my mom from leaving the inn. After getting rid of the bothersome landlady, Susan became even stricter with us.
"If you don't like what I say, you're free to leave."
Naturally, being talked down to like that would upset anyone.
"I'll listen to what you say, the manager Michael, but I don't want to follow that woman's orders."
I was told this by former colleagues numerous times. In response, I tried to talk to Susan, asking if she could be a bit more considerate of the team's feelings, but she wouldn't listen at all. In the end, her oppressive attitude didn't improve, and employees left one after another. Within a few months, almost none of the original team was left, and effectively, Susan took control of the place. However, Tom, who had been working with me since I took over Reed's Inn from the previous generation, stayed despite disliking Susan, trusting me.
"I'll stick with you, Michael, until you decide to leave this place."
He's only 28 years old, a young talent, but has been working in the hotel industry since his teens. Since coming to Reed's Inn, he had been supporting me as my right-hand man in every way. However, Susan saw him as a rebel and cut him off from special tasks. I had entrusted Tom with all the beverage procurement and inventory management, but now he can't even enter the beverage warehouse without permission. I felt terrible for Tom. He's a talented young man. He could leave and work at another inn? With these thoughts, I, a powerless manager, continued to offer our guests heartfelt hospitality. But even that didn't get through to Susan.
"All our guests at Reed's Inn seem to be just old folks. We need to attract younger customers if we want to survive in this industry,"
she said without any experience in management. While it's understandable for an inn to be somewhat mindful of its clientele for business reasons, I believe selecting guests goes against the spirit of hospitality. Shouldn't our role be to make every effort to please both past and future guests? And then, my worst fears were realized. It happened while I was away at a local resort and spa association meeting. A longtime customer of our inn, Mr. Johnson, had called to make a reservation, only for Susan, our manager, to unilaterally cancel it. For the record, that date had been reserved for Mr. Johnson well in advance. Every year, he books the same date to celebrate his wife's birthday, but this year it had been on hold due to renovation work. Having successfully reopened, Mr. Johnson called, hoping to visit. Susan canceled without consulting me. But the real issue isn't about the lack of consultation. It's about making Mr. Johnson feel unwelcome. Susan reportedly refused stubbornly, claiming another guest had already booked. I couldn't stay silent. That date was tentatively held for Mr. Johnson. I had informed you about this, and it was even noted on the schedule. Why did you accept another reservation without any discussion? She scoffed.
"A tentative hold. I don't care about some verbal promise to a regular or whatever. The guests I booked are younger and more profitable. They'll order much more alcohol than an old couple.
I confronted Susan, unable to tolerate her arrogance. Who do you think you are, deciding who's worthy to be our guest? Some kid who doesn't even know the ABCs of service, acting all high and mighty. By the time Tom tried to intervene, it was too late. The frightened looks from the staff were all directed at me. Startled, I looked ahead to find Susan had apparently collapsed from my outburst, sitting on the ground with a terrified expression, shaking with fear. Eventually, with witnesses' testimonies, this incident reached the ears of the CEO, and I was relieved of my managerial duties. Hearing about my decision to leave the workplace early, Tom decided to resign voluntarily on the same day.
I believe you were right, Michael. That woman will surely face karma someday.
All I could do was give a bitter smile at Tom's words. Regardless of what Susan was like, the fact that I couldn't stay on the job was due to my own shortcomings. There might have been a better way to handle things, but I lacked the skill and patience to do so. That's all there was to it. I grew up watching my father's back, the sole heir to the Reed's Inn. Surrounded by new-style inns and hotels, the Reed's Inn stood as a bastion of tradition. Our guests chose us because of the trust and favor they had in the word heritage and my father, Bob, and they cared for me as well. Growing up, there was no doubt in my mind that I would take over the family inn, but that doesn't mean I've always been straight-laced and serious. Despite how I may appear, I got into some mischief as a student and caused trouble for those around me. Being the only son of a traditional inn felt suffocating at times. But that was just youthful folly. As I matured, my rebellious feelings faded, and I started to take life more seriously. All thanks to the kindness of those around me. I was surrounded by earnest adults. My dad, this staff at the inn, and even the guests, who were incredible people working hard to build their companies or serving their country. I felt I couldn't let myself be outdone, and worked hard at the inn. Then, 8 years ago, when my father suffered a stroke and fell ill, I took over the management. Initially, I pushed myself thinking it was only until my father recovered. But unfortunately, he never did. The suddenness of it all was a shock, but there was no time for sorrow. Alongside my mother, the landlady, I managed to keep the inn running, even though I was clueless at first. However, with the support of my mother and the staff, I gained confidence and worked even harder to provide better hospitality. Becoming the manager of the inn, I had a resolution in my heart. Not just to reform our inn, but the entire resort area. The number of visitors to the resort areas was declining year by year. No matter how much our inn strived, without the revitalization of the town itself, there was no future. To achieve this, I believed it was necessary to build more trust among the staff of the surrounding inns and hotels. So, I organized meetings where staff from both long-established and newly entered lodgings could interact, and I created tools for exchanging information. I discarded the notion of business rivals, thinking that if the entire resort area united as a new community, it would rejuvenate the whole area. For example, in times of trouble, such as when a facility experienced a problem, we could immediately refer guests to another lodging. The same went for when extra hands were needed. Job openings at Reed's Inn were shared with other inns that were short-staffed, and vice versa. We transformed the entire resort area into a place that welcomed both guests and workers alike. Thanks to these efforts, the resort town itself became more vibrant, leading to an increase in younger guests and families that had been rare before. This reform of the resort town attracted media attention, and we frequently received interview requests. Eventually, a documentary film was produced, which helped attract a younger generation interested in working in the resort town. Behind the resortification of the long-established Reed's Inn, there were concerns about falling under the umbrella of the Greater New York Hotel Group. It likely stemmed from the fear within about being overtaken and transformed into something completely different. However, I trusted the CEO of the Greater New York Hotel Group. That's because he was an old friend of my dad's and held my father, the manager of Reed's Inn, in high regard. The fact that he covered all construction costs and left me with the rights to manage the inn was due to our relationship. But it seems his daughter didn't get his intentions at all. No, in the end, it was my own lack of strength in conveying my thoughts. I feel terrible for the employees who supported the area of Reed's Inn with me. From what I hear, most of those who left earlier are now working at the resort and spa facilities within this area. Being former employees of Reed's Inn apparently made it easy for them to find new jobs. And frankly, I myself had been approached by well-known inns. Luckily, someone told me they needed my skills. Of course, my right-hand man, Tom, was planning to join me at the same inn. Despite how things turned out, I had no regrets in my heart. The traditional Reed's Inn might have disappeared on my watch, but I'm still here. All I need to do is make a fresh start with my trusted friends. And on the last day working at Greater Ocean Resort, I felt not frustration, but rather a sense of relief. Susan always treated us coldly, but I don't mind anymore. Well, I've been relieved of my duties as manager, so technically, she's the head of the inn now.
Today's your last day, huh? Good job. I heard you got hired at the Marina Inn. It's cheaper and more basic than here, right? Perfect for someone as incompetent as you guys.
With a smile, Susan taunted, and Tom retorted,
You're not fit to be a manager, not someone like you. But no matter how much it changes, this place will always be Reed's Inn to us and our guests. Don't you dare ruin it.
Humph, for someone who didn't even go to college, you sure talk big. And I heard you don't even have a family, abandoned by your parents and raised in an orphanage.
she said with a frown. Tom just grimaced at those words, probably reminded of his tough past. The truth is, Tom lost his parents early and grew up facing many hardships. I haven't heard the details, but I was told no adult around him offered a helping hand. That's why he came to this industry, where he could work and live on his own. Despite his frustration, Tom chose not to retort any further to Susan. I kept quiet, understanding his feelings. Then, Susan turned her scornful laughter and harsh words toward me.
Finally, the useless old man is gone.
I wanted to spend at least the last day laughing. But, feeling indebted to her, I responded to her arrogant behavior with silence. Then, from behind us, a voice said, "This is just terrible." Surprised, Tom and I turned around to find Mr. Johnson and his wife standing at the entrance. That's right. Today was the birthday of Mr. Johnson's wife. Normally, we would have welcomed them at Reed's Inn, but this time we had refused. "Mr. Johnson, what brings you here?" I blurted out without thinking. Then Susan looked at me and said, "Mr. Johnson, but I'm sure we declined his reservation." Glancing over, I saw the employee holding Mr. Johnson's luggage was shaking. But it wasn't just him. All the staff who see Mr. Johnson stood at attention, trembling. Mr. Johnson, unfazed, took off his shoes and strode into the inn. At that moment, even Susan turned pale and was speechless, frozen in place. Well, that might be understandable. After all, Mr. Johnson once served as the President of the United States. Anyone would recognize him, and it wouldn't be surprising to be overwhelmed by his formidable aura upon meeting him. Even I was intimidated when I first met him. But despite his appearance, he turned out to be a kind and compassionate man. Someone who has been a head of state obviously has a broad and deep perspective. However, today Mr. Johnson seemed a bit angry, looking around the building with a frown and saying,
"What a terrible state this is. There's no sense of history or charm left. And I haven't seen a single familiar face since I got here. I can't believe our region has come to this."
Caught off guard by his sudden outburst, all the employees looked down.
No way, Mr. Johnson, you can't be serious.
Susan was just gasping for breath. Then, Mr. Johnson noticed me and Tom, his face breaking into a smile.
There you are. I heard through the grapevine you were fired, so I had to come see for myself. But here you are. And where's the landlady?
I responded solemnly to Mr. Johnson, who approached me with a look of joy. "No, Mr. Johnson, the firing is true. She has retired. She was indeed of age. In fact, today is my last day as well. It's an honor to meet you one last time." Hearing this, Mr. Johnson sighed deeply.
This is Reed's Inn, a tradition that's been continued since the founder's time. To think that you and the traditions that your father and the landlady have upheld are being cast aside. I can hardly believe it.
I believe it's just the times deciding for us. Now it's called Greater Ocean Resort, and she's the new manager. She told us our way of thinking is outdated. I took this opportunity to turn the conversation to Susan. Mr. Johnson then turned his gaze to her. Susan was as still as if she'd turned to stone. Where had her usual vigor vanished?
You're the CEO's daughter, aren't you? Quite the eloquent speaker for someone so young. To challenge the tradition that has lasted 80 years. Could you explain to this old man what exactly you find so outdated about Reed's Inn?
Susan, sweating profusely across her forehead and all over her face, was moving her mouth as if speaking, but no sound was coming out, making it completely unclear what she was trying to say. In response, Mr. Johnson continued his speech.
Come to think of it, you were the one who took our reservation call the other day, weren't you? No matter what I said, you insisted that there were no available slots that day. Even if there had been some mistake, the right thing to do would have been to talk honestly and propose an alternative.
Cornered by Mr. Johnson, Susan became utterly disheartened. Unable to utter a sound, she could only whisper in a barely audible voice, "I'm terribly sorry," and collapsed on the spot. Just then, the office phone started ringing. After 2, 3, 4 rings, with everyone still in shock and no one moving to answer it, Tom ran to pick it up.
It's the CEO of the Greater New York calling for you.
Tom called out to me. Hearing this, Mr. Johnson said,
Maybe it's a call to bring you back. Reed's Inn must absolutely need you, right? That should be obvious to anyone.
Saying this, Mr. Johnson looked at me and smiled. According to the CEO, Mr. Johnson, who had heard rumors that I was about to be fired, had contacted the headquarters of the Greater New York Hotel Group. Susan had not told the CEO about arbitrarily canceling Mr. Johnson's reservation, and had only reported that she was threatened when she tried to discuss it. So this was the first time he learned the truth.
It seems I was under a misunderstanding. Moreover, I had not given Susan any managerial authority. She was supposed to be learning as a beginner. I never imagined she would act so tyrannically. I am truly sorry.
The CEO apologized to me. No, I should have also properly conveyed our beliefs to Susan. She just graduated from college and must have known nothing. She wasn't the one we should have been fighting against. I reflect on everything up to now. Susan wasn't the type of person who lacked motivation. She had her own ideals. But I never discussed those ideals with her. If I had clearly expressed my opinion, she might not have unilaterally canceled Mr. Johnson's reservation. While I was on the phone with the CEO, Mr. Johnson approached.
Could you transfer that call to me?
I said, sure, and handed the phone to him.
You were about to do something outrageous. It's not just me who trusts Michael's character. If he leaves this in, all our regular customers will likely stop coming.
As I listened to Mr. Johnson's words beside me, I felt a warmth in my heart. Tom came over to me with a happy expression on his face and said,
Aligning with the former nation's top, that's our Michael for you. I'll follow you wherever you go.
We exchanged glances and laughed. In the end, despite being persuaded by the CEO, we decided to stay at Greater Ocean Resort. Most of the decision-making regarding the inn was entrusted to me as the manager, and Tom was to continue working as my right-hand man as before. However, the employees of Reed's Inn, including the landlady who had quit before, would not return. Although some said they would come back if Susan left, I wanted her to stay too. No, I thought Susan should be here. As the CEO's only daughter, she must eventually become a crucial figure within the Greater New York Hotel Group. For those of us under their umbrella, Susan's growth is absolutely desirable. Therefore, I want to work with her, pooling our strengths. Since then, she seemed to have changed her mind a bit, welcoming guests and serving coffee herself, starting to entertain. Her demeanor and attitude changed rapidly, and she no longer showed any attitude of looking down on people as she did at first. Behind the scenes, she often argues and has petty squabbles with Tom, but I turn a blind eye to it, pretending that they are good friends to the point of fighting. 3 years later, my mother passed away. Many customers who had been kind to my mother, the landlady of Reed's Inn, gathered at the funeral, which filled me with genuine gratitude. And it was the catalyst for me to completely let go of Reed's Inn. From now on, I want to work wholeheartedly to elevate our new style inn, Greater Ocean Resort. So, I'm going to push this entire resort and spa area, where we've lived through it all, to become the world's #1 hospitality town, both now and in the future.